Bill Gates' company made a public promise in January 2026. Windows President Pavan Davuluri stood before the world and said they had finally heard you. They had heard the complaints about broken updates, invasive AI, and a platform that was making your computer slower, stranger, and more hostile to you every single month. They said they were going to fix performance, fix reliability, and cut back the artificial intelligence nobody asked for. On January 13th, 2026, Microsoft delivered the very first Windows 11 update of the year. Let me tell you what that update actually did. It broke PCs. It sent some machines into boot loops they could not escape without entering recovery mode manually. It destroyed Outlook for users with certain email configurations. It locked remote workers out of their own corporate desktops. It shattered cloud storage saves. It gutted gaming performance on NVIDIA hardware by 10 to 20 frames per second. And when furious users tried to uninstall it, the uninstall itself failed with an error code that left machines stuck in a broken state with no automatic way out. In this investigation, we're going to expose 3 platform crimes Microsoft committed in the exact same month they promised to fix everything. The mandatory update that turns your PC into a liability. The screenshot surveillance feature they built got caught building and are now desperately trying to pretend never existed. And the hardware policy that declared 240 million perfectly functional computers obsolete, not because they stopped working, but because Microsoft decided the software required it. Let's start with what Microsoft's January security patch actually delivered to your machine. For over 2 decades, Patch Tuesday has been the bedrock of Windows reliability. The implicit contract was simple. On the second Tuesday of every month, Microsoft patches the vulnerabilities. Your machine stays secure, you stay working. It was the one thing you could count on. January 13th, 2026. Microsoft releases KB5074-1-09, the 2026 01 security update for Windows 11. Every Windows 11 machine takes it automatically. There is no opt-out. There is no warning. This is, as Microsoft called it at the time, a standard monthly security update. Within hours, reports started coming in. Black screens before the desktop loaded. Outlook freezing completely for users whose email configurations used POP accounts or PST files, which means millions of people who had been using Outlook the same way for a decade woke up to a broken inbox with no explanation. Cloud storage saves stopped working. Users trying to save a document to OneDrive or Dropbox found their files going nowhere, the application either stalling or returning an error. For users relying on cloud-first workflows, the exact modern workflow Microsoft tells you to adopt, this was catastrophic. Then came the enterprise damage. Remote desktop authentication failed entirely on Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. IT professionals and remote workers found themselves locked out. A security update, mandatory and automatic, had severed the connection between remote employees and their company infrastructure. Microsoft's own cloud platforms, the ones they sell as the future of enterprise computing, stopped working because of a Microsoft update. Then, the gaming collapse. NVIDIA publicly acknowledged they were investigating performance issues following KB5074-1-09. Users on NVIDIA forums reported frame rate drops of 10 to 20% across demanding titles. The consistent finding was simple: uninstall the Windows Security Update and performance returns completely. The operating system was the variable. The hardware was the same. Windows broke it. Read that again. A mandatory security update broke gaming performance badly enough that NVIDIA, a hardware company, had to issue a public statement about a Microsoft software problem. The most damning detail came when users tried to remove it. Microsoft themselves recommended uninstalling KB5074-1-09 for affected machines. But for a significant portion of users, the uninstall failed with error code 0x800F0905, leaving machines in a broken state that could not be fixed forward or backward. Users with boot failures could not reach the desktop at all. Their only path to recovery required entering the Windows recovery environment by force cycling the power button multiple times at startup to trigger the recovery menu manually. Microsoft issued 2 emergency out-of-band patches, KB507774 and KB5078-127, to try to contain the damage. Neither resolved the boot failure issue. This was not a minor release. This was not a bad month. This was a mandatory update that Microsoft pushed to every Windows 11 machine in the world. During the same month, their president had publicly promised to make Windows more reliable, and it resulted in broken email, broken cloud storage, broken enterprise infrastructure, broken gaming, and machines that could not be turned back on without manual intervention. This is not a theory. This is documented in Microsoft's own support pages. This is the subject of hundreds of confirmed reports across Microsoft's own Q&A forums, Reddit, and the Feedback Hub. Microsoft published the list of failures themselves, but KB50074179 is not even the most damaging thing Microsoft shipped in January. That distinction belongs to a feature they built a year earlier, got caught building, and are now quietly hoping you forget about. In May 2024, Microsoft announced something it called Recall. They said it was your computer's photographic memory, a feature that would take a screenshot of your desktop every few seconds, run it through artificial intelligence, and store everything you had ever done on your machine in a searchable database. They called it revolutionary. They said it would change how you interact with your PC forever. They were right that it would change something. They were wrong about what. Security researchers got a preview build. Within days, they discovered that the initial version of Recall stored every screenshot it captured in a plaintext SQLite database, completely unencrypted, sitting openly on your hard drive. Security researcher Alexander Hagena built a tool he named Total Recall that could extract the entire contents of that database in seconds: usernames, passwords, banking screens, medical records, private messages, every window you had opened, captured, and indexed, and available to anyone with local access to the machine. This was unencrypted and exposed. Think about what that means. Microsoft had designed a feature that would make your computer easier to access for attackers. The public backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Signal, the privacy messaging application, built a dedicated setting specifically to block Recall from screenshotting its windows, enabled by default. Brave and AdGuard followed it with their own Recall blocking features. 3 separate software companies built countermeasures specifically to defend against a Microsoft operating system feature. Microsoft delayed Recall's launch, then delayed it again, then delayed it a third time. June 2024, October 2024, December 2024. A year of delays, re-architecting, and rebuilding, not because the feature was technically incomplete, but because the privacy implications were so severe that Microsoft could not publicly defend them. They eventually pushed a limited version to Windows insiders and began a broader rollout in 2025. But by January 2026, internal sources confirmed that Microsoft was reconsidering the feature entirely. The company privately acknowledged that Recall had not delivered in its current form. Executives were discussing whether to abandon the Recall name completely because it had become so toxic in public discourse. Here is what should make your blood boil. This feature, designed to photograph everything you do on your computer every few seconds forever, is something Microsoft spent over a year trying to force onto your machine. They pushed it to insiders. They argued for it. They defended it. They called it innovation. The only reason it is not running on your computer right now, building a permanent record of every document you've opened, every website you've visited, every private message you've written, is because enough people refuse to accept it. That refusal is now being written up as a strategic retreat inside Microsoft. They are planning to quietly reduce the feature's footprint, retire the name, and rebuild it under different branding. They are betting that by the time you forget, they will have tried again. Do not let them bet correctly. And while Microsoft was burying their surveillance feature in January 2026, they were simultaneously enforcing the hardware policy that had already condemned 240 million working computers to the landfill. For as long as Windows existed, the unspoken promise was this: as long as your hardware works, we will keep the software running on it. You bought the machine, you own the machine. We update the software. That deal ended when Windows 11 arrived. Microsoft introduced hardware requirements for Windows 11, TPM 2.0 chip, secure boot, an approved processor list that had nothing to do with whether your computer was fast enough to run the operating system. A machine built in 2018 with a capable Intel Core i7, running everything you needed it to run, could be excluded from Windows 11. Not because it was slow or broken, but because it lacked a specific chip Microsoft decided was mandatory. Canalys, the research firm, ran the numbers. 240 million PCs, 1/5 of every computer in use on Earth, cannot meet Windows 11's hardware requirements. These are not machines sitting in closets. These are working computers in offices and homes and schools around the world, running software that functions perfectly, doing everything their owners need them to do. Microsoft ended support for Windows 10 on October 14, 2025. No more security updates, no more patches, no more assistance. Users who could not upgrade because their hardware was blacklisted by Microsoft's own policy were told their options were the Extended Security Updates program, which costs money, or buying a new computer. Microsoft wrote the software requirements that made your machine incompatible, then told you to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on a new machine to fix the problem they created. The environmental cost is staggering. Industry estimates project 1.06 billion pounds of e-waste from this transition, the greenhouse gas equivalent of 320,000 cars. Not because these computers failed, because Microsoft decided they should. The market responded in a way Microsoft did not expect. Windows 11's market share fell from 58.18% in October 2025 to 50.7% by December 2025. In the same period, end of life. Windows 10, the operating system Microsoft had already abandoned, actually grew. Users who could have switched chose to keep running an unsupported operating system rather than move to the platform Microsoft was forcing them toward. That is not a ringing endorsement. That is a public verdict. And the users who could not or would not buy new hardware for Windows 11 discovered something. Their computers ran beautifully on Linux. Zorin OS, built specifically for Windows refugees, reported over 780,000 users switching from Windows following Windows 10's end-of-life announcements. Linux desktop market share grew 70% in 3 years, crossing 5% in the United States for the first time in history. Steam's Linux gaming share reached an all-time high. The Stack Overflow Developer Survey 2025 found that 27.8% of developers now use Ubuntu personally. These are not enthusiasts making an ideological statement. These are ordinary people whose computers were declared obsolete by a software policy, who installed a free operating system on the same hardware and found it worked better than Windows 11. Microsoft did not enforce the hardware upgrade cycle because Windows 11 needed that hardware. They enforced it because the hardware upgrade cycle generates revenue, and Microsoft depends on that revenue. 240 million functional computers became e-waste not because technology required it, because a business decision demanded it. So what does this mean for you right now, with this machine in front of you? It means that in the same month, Microsoft's president stood before the world and promised to make Windows more reliable. Microsoft shipped a mandatory update that broke PCs across the globe, quietly buried a surveillance feature they were hoping you'd forget, and continued enforcing the hardware policy that turned 240 million working computers into landfill. The promises were real. The January delivery was a disaster, and the pattern is now old enough that you can set your calendar by it. Here is what the smart money is already doing. If your machine runs Windows 10 and Microsoft has declared it incompatible with Windows 11, install Ubuntu, Linux Mint, or Zorin OS. All three are free. All three run faster on older hardware than Windows 11 runs on new hardware. Zorin OS was built specifically for this transition. It looks familiar, it works immediately, and you can run it from a USB drive before you commit to anything. Test your machine before you change anything permanent. The risk is zero. If you're on Windows 11, Windows 11 and it is working for now, turn off Recall if it is present on your machine. Review what Copilot is collecting. Check your OneDrive sync settings. Know what your computer is doing with your data, because Microsoft's default answer has always been everything. Automatically, always. Stop letting them own your computer. They promised to fix it in January. You saw what January looked like.